Good morning to everyone that is taking part at this webinar, this binational webinar, Brazil, Germany, about crisis and challenges in global food systems. Good morning to everyone in Brazil and good afternoon to everyone in Germany. In this webinar, we have simultaneous translation, English-Portuguese. You have to click on the icon on the lower part of the screen and choose the language you prefer. Should you choose one of the languages, you can also turn off the original sound. My name is English Melches. I'm the director for the agri-political talk between Germany and Brazil, and I'm also the moderator for this binational dialogue that we organized together with the Brazilian Agribusiness Association, ABAG. And Caio Carvalho, the president of the ABAG, will talk to us very soon. My beginning words is that we are having the worst food crisis in decades. Certainly the worst crisis since I became an agronome. It is a perfect storm conjuncture. And the hunger is increasing for many years now. Climate change, conflicts, wars are causing this, as well as the economic crisis. But we also see structural and long-time problems in many countries. And this comes together with conjunctural problems, mainly the war in Ukraine. And the confluence of all these factors, we can certainly see that we are talking about a crisis in the whole world. Today, we want to reflect upon this crisis. You understand the social, political, and environmental topics. And we also want to talk about the solutions to overcome this crisis in the food systems worldwide. We also want to understand what are the challenges for the decision makers worldwide. I also want to emphasize about the plural when we talk about solutions. We want to talk about different ways to do agriculture, to do ranching. We also have a huge difference in cultures and ways of dealing with it. We want to debate this with fantastic experts, and we are really proud to be able and get together acting and thinking people. I want to introduce you one by one further on. But to begin, I have the huge pleasure to announce the presentation of one of the biggest international experts on the topic food security, Professor Jochen von Braun, a person for which I have the most profound respect and admiration. Jochen von Braun is an agriculture economist with a doctorate from the University of Göttingen at the Zentrum für Entwicklungsforschung, ZEF. He was the director in its foundation in 1970, and today he is distinguished professor for the chair Economic and Technological Change. His research focuses on the development policy, markets and trade, poverty, health and nutrition, agriculture, science and technology. Von Braun is president of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences of the Vatican, a member of the German National Academy of Sciences, Leopoldina, Academy of Science of North Rhine-Westphalia, German Academy of Science and Engineering, and a member of American Association for the Advancement of Science. It's a member of the International Advisory Committee on Bioeconomy and chairman of the Scientific Council for the UN Secretary General's Food System 2002 until 2009. He was general director of the International Food Policy Research Institute that has his center in Washington, D.C. He was also the president of the International Association of Agriculture Economists. Professor von Braun, is a great honor. You have the floor.
Thank you for this kind introduction.
Muito obrigado.
Colleagues, I greet you in the morning in Brazil, and maybe there are some colleagues here in Germany in the afternoon. I would have preferred to be with you at these exciting times in Brazil. I enjoyed my visits to your great country. I had several of those, and I have great admiration of the food and agriculture and economics professions in your country. We have a challenging agenda today. I will share my PowerPoint with you and give a brief introduction. I really look forward to the interaction with the great panel which you, Mr. Melchers, have put together, and look forward to comments from Mr. Carvalho, Ms. Biedermann, and Professor Young. Let me try again. Well, I will basically talk about two issues: the crisis causes and consequences, and then the solutions and way forward. Let me emphasize at the outset, what Brazil does in food, agriculture, and environment matters for the world. And what happens to world food, agriculture, and environment matters for Brazil. We need to keep in mind the scale of the food system of Brazil and being a global player also potentially on environmental issues. First of all, we must recognize that we deal with a multidimensional crisis, which actually has 7 dimensions. On the little picture on the left, you see that food prices, the FAO Food Price Index, has moved upwards since 2019, 2020, 21, and in 22, and increased in volatility. Those are two, the upward shift and the volatility are two characteristics. And they are due to this multidimensional crisis. First of all, COVID-19 disrupted the food value chains worldwide and often locally. Climate change destroys food systems' resilience. Wars and superpower conflicts add uncertainty to investment and hinder trade. I will come back to that. The food price inflation make healthy diets more and more unaffordable and increase hunger. The high energy prices and fertilizer costs constrain agriculture and food industries' growth. The accumulated debts, which were accumulated during the COVID crisis, the pandemic, because so much had to be spent on social protection. But now the money is no longer there, and these programs, nutrition programs, social protection programs are in decline. And last not least, the destruction of nature due to various factors. First of all, climate change, but also other factors, erodes biodiversity and the food system. Biodiversity and agrobiodiversity, the diversity and richness of our genetic resources for food and agriculture, are critical for the long-term sustainability of agriculture. So the food system as a whole is under resilient stress. And These stressors, climate change, wars, macroeconomy, and pandemic, impact on the four key components of the food system: the production and processing sector, the income, employment, the nutrition and health, and the market services and insurance sector, and their interlinkages. Without taking a food systems perspective, we cannot understand the resilient stress in which the food system is nowadays. The high energy and fertilizer prices make food production more and more expensive. Inflation is global, but high in many countries. So we have diversity, and we have the exchange rate movements, the strengthening of the dollar virtually against all currencies, increase imported goods and services, including fertilizer prices. On the left-hand side, you see the dramatic change in fertilizer prices and natural gas. On the right-hand side, you see that the cost of a healthy diet is rapidly increasing worldwide. The global average is the blue curve, but it's also happening in Brazil, not to the extent up to a level of healthy diets elsewhere in the world, but the food price inflation is mainly driven by cereal and vegetable oil prices. We have a new global dynamics of cereal stocks. The relevant lines in this graph are the red lines. That's the stock to use ratio without China and without India. Why is this relevant? Because these two countries, in the current crisis situation, somewhat understandable, are not engaging as usual in international trade and have accumulated large stocks, especially China, 150 million tons of wheat or so. When stock to use ratios go down, as is here indicated for maize and wheat, then markets get nervous and speculative tendencies set in. We observed that already. The percentage of non-commercial traders in commodity markets increased a lot since February this year. So you see the red line shows declining stock to use ratios. Overall, by the way, the world in the last couple of years has consumed more than it has produced. So we need to watch this carefully. The Ukrainian war affects global food trade. In this graph, I show on the left-hand side the global oilseed exports, and on the right-hand side, the coarse grain exports in million tons. This does give you a picture of, with the blue part of the column, of Brazil's role, which is gaining importance. Let me remind you, you probably know this, that 30% of global wheat trade originates from Ukraine and Russia, and 20% of global corn trade originates from these two countries. And the disruption of the trade linkages to the Black Sea ports had major impacts on volatility of markets and were at the core of the acute food crisis. Export restrictions tend to set in when crises occur with increasing uncertainties. Let me explain this graph here. It shows you the week since the beginning of a crisis. The bottom blue lines is the COVID crisis. When this started and value chains were disrupted after week 10, export restrictions were starting. They came down later on. The yellow curve shows you the setting in after the food price shocks in 2008. It started around the 12th week or so and was kept at a high level, didn't go away for almost a year. And the red line shows you what happened so far as a consequence of the Russian invasion in the Ukraine. So trade disruptions matter for the world, they matter for Brazil, and they matter a lot for low-income food importing countries. Often we are confronted with the idea that when prices go up, somehow the supply response will be strong, and the incentive opportunities will solve the crisis. We will grow out of the crisis. Well, that is only partly the case. Our research on this issue in the crisis 2008, 9 to 10 is depicted here. Let's just look at wheat. You can glance at the other crops. The net effect of the very significant price increases during that time was very small, almost zero. The impact of the price increase that should have been expected would have be a production supply response of almost 10%. That is the column going up, the gray shaded one. But there were also the cost increases of, for instance, fertilizer prices. That goes down. And there is another critical factor, the impact of volatility. When prices get very unstable, investors shy away from investing because this volatility indicates risk. So we cannot count on a fast supply response in this crisis if we go by the insights from the last price crisis. Climate change is already changing crop yields. You see that how that will turn out into the future from the climate models. Until 2050, it will be much more dramatic than what it is showing today. And the Southern Hemisphere, the Mediterranean area and East Asia, but also parts of Latin America, are going to be seriously affected. The global hunger trends in times of crisis have turned around from a healthy trend until 5 years ago or 7 years ago. We have lost the progress in bringing the numbers of hunger down. This trend was going on the last 40 years, going down, bringing hunger numbers down from about more than 35% to about 10 or 12% of world population. That it turns around is a matter of the current crisis, but also a matter of structural issues which have materialized in the last decade. Lack of investment, lack of incentives, and climate change. Climate change already had a negative impact on biodiversity. This is the last 3 decades, where it's red or yellow. The climate change impacts on biodiversity are already, these are probabilities likely to be quite negative, and that's going to increase. Now, biodiversity, the richness of species and varieties of species in nature is one aspect of it. But we need to also watch the agro biodiversity, that current land races and current advanced seeds, improved seeds, are losing their esteem in the cropping system. So plant breeding has a challenge. Plant genetic resource conservation has a challenge. Yesterday, by the way, was World Biodiversity Day. So we need to watch this. I mentioned already the increasing debts, these curves give you an indication that we are in a debt crisis that is also making it more and more difficult for low and middle income countries, that's the gray curve, to mobilize the capital to invest in infrastructure, but also to invest in what brings the food system forward. Then we come to solutions and the way forward. The vision is the food system needed in the world, in Latin America and globally, is productive, efficient, sustainable, resilient, serving people's nutrition, being inclusive, and protects ecologies, embedded in a circular bioeconomy. Now, this is a lot we ask from the food system. And you will see right away that some of these visionary objectives are in conflict with each other. So we have to carefully consider synergies and trade-offs of all actions related to food system and related policies. The Food System Summit made it clear that transformative action in food systems is fundamental to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, said the UN Secretary General when he tabled the 5 action areas, which I have listed here: nourish all people, boost nature-based solutions, advance equitable livelihoods, build resilience, and accelerate the means of implementation. Now, these are not just words. More than 160 member states have initiated food system transformation initiatives, and that needs to continue. What has the science community come up with for the Food System Summit and beyond? By the way, the Food System Summit initiatives shall last until 2030. So there are follow-up meetings planned every other year. The next one will already be next year. We have put forward these 7 priorities for the science agenda, which I believe are of significance for all countries, including Brazil, including Germany, and other nations. Innovations to end hunger and increase availability and affordability of healthy diets. That relates to efficiency of how the system functions and productivity. De-risk the system, especially climate. Innovations for land, credit, and labor arrangements to be fair and efficient. The bioscience innovations in which Embrapa your universities are so excellent, serving people's health, system productivity, and ecological well-being. A focus on soils, land, and water to protect the genetic base and biodiversity. A focus on aquaculture, the blue food sectors, and cutting across digital innovations for efficiency of food systems. Can we achieve still a world in which hunger is drastically reduced? Well, yes, that's what this marginal cost curve of what it costs to drastically reduce hunger by 2030. You can read this curve like this. The lowest cost investments that bring large numbers of people out of hunger are to be seen from 0 to 500 million people at the bottom axis. And if you look at that, these are agriculture, R&D, efficiency enhancement, extension services, ICT for agriculture, small-scale irrigation expansion, especially in Africa, new agricultural R&D, and then come other important investments, female literacy, social protection, and so on. But the unit cost of these to bring people, extra million or 10 million of people out of hunger are increasing. Well, we need to focus also on a balanced portfolio of actions and embrace the facts of the costing of end hunger. But to do this smart requires that we especially invest initially in what brings large numbers of people out of hunger fast at low cost. And that can be done. We need to understand one other aspect for sustainability, the true cost of food. The true cost of food is currently not paid in the markets. In the markets, we pay, as you see on the right-hand side of this graph, $9 trillion per annum. But the true cost, including the indirect costs, the externalities of food, are about 28 trillion per annum. So 3 times the market-based cost. What are these costs? They are health costs, they are environmental costs. Because sustainable and healthy food is expensive and unsustainable and unhealthy food is too cheap, we have these externalities. Business profits do not reflect the value created or reduced for society, and our GDP accounting is bypassing these indirect effects too. I spoke briefly about social safety nets and their financing, but I need to emphasize this for the solution portfolio. I mentioned that also on the marginal cost curve. During the pandemic, more than 200 countries adopted 1,600 social safety net measures. That's a number of the International Labour Organization. Domestic resource mobilization will not be enough. International support is needed, especially in low and lower middle income countries because of the debt issue. But also needed are improved qualities of safety nets with nutrition, health, and school feeding components. Structural economic policy issues need to move higher on the agenda as we move forward. I will be in a moment concluding. So first, we need to strengthen policy implementation capacities. You remember point number 5 of the UN Secretary General was strengthen the means of implementation. So these capacities relate to implement innovations from science to actually to the field and in the system, innovations on environment, on social, and on land use and rights, and to facilitate global and local involvement in food systems policies by smallholders and by traditional population groups. They, by the way, traditional and indigenous peoples communities played a significant role, to my knowledge, for the first time in a food summit last year. What's the vision? We need to make bioeconomy a reality to overcome the crisis. The bioeconomy, which strengthens nature positive bio-based solutions to the crisis in the production and distribution systems, draws on bio-knowledge, bio-processes, bio-resources, and with innovation and science unlocks the potential towards a sustainable economy on the right-hand side of this hyper-complex graph, which I ask you to absorb. Sustainable solutions, however, also need sustainable consumption, not only production. So what policy actions to address for the global food crisis to overcome? We need to distinguish short-term and long-term. Keep food and fertilizer markets open, avoid restrictive trade policies. Grain stock management requires dialogue by those who have large stocks. Short-term changes in food production reduce the grain-based bioenergy and the feed need to be considered. The large share of feed use from corn and also wheat, for instance, us in Europe, and social protection and nutrition actions. The long term requires investment in the infrastructure of food systems for resilience, and a massive increase in R&D for agricultural productivity increases. But how do we get this? We need to address the governance challenges to prepare for complex food crises. As Brazil in a couple of years will be chairing G20, I understand, there's another opportunity. I believe India is next year and then Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. But we need to connect these global initiatives with the UN initiatives, follow up to the food summit, but regional and national food system actions too. And mobilize the private sector, civil society, and the science community, build a science policy interface for solid actions. Thank you for your attention.
Muito obrigado, professor. Você trouxe
Thank you very
elementos
much, Professor. You brought very valuable elements, and I want to highlight
várias vezes apareceu
so many times we have the emphasis on innovation and investment of modernization and new technologies in the economy that were measured on social and economic level. I believe that it's food for thought. As we always do in our webinars, the topic is discussed and reflected based on different points of view and always guaranteeing a bilateral dialogue. And so I want to introduce the people that will take part in this debate on their business point of view, on the social society and academy. We have a very high level debaters. I want to introduce them quickly, and then I will go more in detail. I want to highlight Luis Carlos Correa Carvalho, or our friend also called Caio Carvalho, that is the president of the Brazilian Association of Agribusiness, that together with our agro-political dialogue is doing this event. Rachel Biederman is co-facilitator of the Coalition Brazil and senior vice president for the Americas of International Conservation. And last but not least, we also have Marcus Jank, senior lecturer in agribusiness of INSPIR and coordinator of the INSPIR think tank Agro Global. Let's begin with the first one, with Caio Carvalho, agri-engineer that has studied at ESALC in post-graduation and also studied business administration at the Faculty of São Paulo. Caio is president of the National Academy for Agriculture, is director of Canaplan, the private company that works as a consultancy enterprise in the agriculture sector, works on many different sectors. It's also partner of Bio Agency that works with sugar and ethanol on the national market and international market, and is also member of the bioenergy group. Caio, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you with us. It's not the first time in this space of APD. You have the floor. Ingo, thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor to the AMAG to be here and participate. I really enjoyed the presentation from Professor von Braun, and literally, I need to say that I agree 100%, and that allows me to feel very free to comment on it. I'm trying to keep track of the time here, and I want to say that we live in a time where the conjuncture is so complex, and obviously this brings many problems and challenges. So we cannot react as good as we should. Professor van Braun commented on conflicts, synergies in the agriculture systems. And I must say, in Brazil, we live a reality that has important characteristics. One of them is that we still have in our evolution process agriculture with a lot of young people and people that are open to adopt new technologies. And the second point that I want to highlight is that in a general way, when we analyze the evolution of agriculture in the world, we see that the tropical world, with some small exceptions, had an adaptation of the technology that comes from the other developed countries, and that we have other problems in the tropical world, like different soil degradation, and because of the very distinct reality in the tropics. So beginning at that, I would say that the most important aspect that we have been developing in Brazil in the last years is the view of integration. The view of integration, we are not talking only about technology. We are not only talking about the integration of different crops with many different plants in the year. We also talking about the carbon footstep, and we also are talking here about integration, about the public and private aspects. So in order to be making sense of the practical way, we have a clear vision of the circular bioeconomy, as Professor van Baum mentioned, to understand better his impacts on the long productivity chains. Brazil has a continental size, and we have important characteristics. So we have a huge impact regarding hydrocarbonates, and we still have a huge volume to be get in the hydrocarbonates, and we also have a high impact on the food systems. These worlds of hydrocarbons and carbohydrates and proteins are every time more connected, and we can have technologies to get carbohydrates becoming hydrocarbonates, green hydrocarbons, and it's an important vision of science in our agribusiness, and getting to create value and getting chains together that at the end bring the base of the development of the industrial and agribusiness. It's important to mention that if you have to focus on the food safety, and now this focus is back because of the moment we are living in, the decarbonation with focus on the greenhouse effect gases. And as the professor said very well, the problem of the biodiversity. I would add Professor van Rijn, in Brazil, we woke up in the last 5 years to the change of the biodynamic of the soil. Obviously, the soil has life in it, and this life depends on the technology of production I have. These tropical soils are chemically poorer, but still have a very rich biological life. And the use of many cultures and the intensive use of the soil in terms of production is guaranteeing us resilience, because it allows us the enrichment of the biodynamic of the soils. And this is a factor of our reality. So what I want to say is that this means that we have a huge knowledge where Brazil is the one important player, and that maybe they can be used in the American countries in, as a rule, have a very similar conditions as we have here in the tropics. Beyond that, we have in Brazil the hydrocarbonates with a huge potential, carbohydrates and proteins. We are very rich, and we have a lot of potable water. And now we see in Brazil a awakening of the irrigation and having a better productivity and higher productivity, integration of cultures, and the reduction of the gas emissions. So this is the highest impact we have right now. On the other side, the digital world in the agro or bio sector has fantastic colors that allows high productivity gains and cost reductions, also reducing the gas emissions in a spectacular way, I must say, where we have many small and medium-sized companies. Here in Piracicaba, where I live in our campus, we have a lot of startups that working with that. So, and I would say with any doubt that this is the look to our internal world, and we also need to look to the external world. I would like to finish to talk about geopolitics and something that really concerns me a lot, dear professor and colleagues, that the comeback of the protections and the sum of actions that really worries me. I see, for example, I was 2 weeks meeting with ambassadors and groups from the European Union to discuss Brazil. And they have a lot of proposals, but we also need to deal with this reality of the tropical world. We need to have the K coefficient, as I call it. So I need to adapt the technology from the rest of the world to the tropics. And what I asked ambassadors and what I taught to the European negotiators, that everything that is regarding to global rules and laws must consider that we should be able to integrate and adapt that to the tropics. We see it in the world that the world goes into the direction of Asia, and at least 1/3 of the world is autocratic nowadays, and 2/3 of the Western world need to do something. We need really to integrate ourselves, and that's why the European Union is so important. even we have deep roots in Europe as Brazilians, and we need to create integration to avoid isolation. With that, I want to thank you, Professor, for your wise words and to allow us to be and speak so freely.
Thank you very much, Carlos. You made us feel at home too. I would like to highlight two things that you spoke about. One thing is the issue of geopolitics, and during some other conversations that we have been speaking about that, and your concerns are very valuable. And on the other hand, your emphasis in the matter of technology and the mission that we have in Brazil in terms of decarbonization and the economy as a whole. So this reminds me of our greatest challenge when we speak about the agricultural dialogue between Germany and Brazil, because we have a general tendency, a general trend in Germany, a general will to reduce the intensity of the um, fertilizers and poisonous substances and so on. And this is a general trend that we have in order to reach a greater degree of sustainability. But in Brazil, on the other hand, we have a different situation. We need to increase that intensity, uh, also to reduce pressure that we feel in Brazil from deforestation and the more sustainable use of natural resources. So these balances that, so to speak, these trades and balances are a factor that always troubles us when we have events or publications between both countries. So, well, thank you so much for Caio for your time and for being aware of time. And we will now have the great pleasure of having the participation of Raquel Biederman. Thank you so much, Raquel, for being here with us. You are a co-facilitator of the coalition, the climate Brazil Climate Forest Agriculture, the senior vice president for the Americans Conservation, Environmental Conservation. So it is nice to better understand the Brazil Coalition. It is more than an alliance. It is a movement. It is an impressive movement. It is an intelligent and influent movement, and it approaches all kinds of topics from forest to agriculture. So the coalition has been contributing greatly to the information production about that topic in Brazil, but also outside of Brazil. So we are quite happy to have you here. We have been watching many events. Last week you were in New York, in the Climate Week in New York, and we have the greatest respect for your actions in such events and others. Rachel, you are a bachelor from the University of São Paulo, a master's in environmental sciences at USP, which is the São Paulo State University. You have a master in international law from the Washington College in Law with a focus in the environment. You have a doctorate degree in public administration and governance from the Getúlio Vargas Foundation. You have been joint coordinator researcher in the Center for Studies and Sustainability in the Administration School for São Paulo between 2008 and 11. And you are now the executive director of WRI in Brazil from 2011 and 20. So, Raquel, it is a huge pleasure to have you here. I will have to say that if you have any chat box or for whoever's watching, if you want to ask any questions, you can write that down in the chat box. So, Raquel, thank you so much for being here with us today. You have the floor. Thank you, Ingo. It is a huge pleasure to have you, to be here with you and hear the wise words from Professor Brown and also hearing Caio speak along the lines of sustainability. The coalition, as you said, is a movement created in 2014 with the union between the productive sector and the private sectors and the non-governmental organizations. Back then, we understood that it was paramount to add towards a proposal of a low carbon economy in Brazil. And we have been working since 2014 to build many recommendations for public policies, investment policies, and good business practices in the soil sectors. Recently, we have published a number of recommendations for the candidates in the elections this year, and we have been recommending many giving many different recommendations so that Brazil can reach where Professor Brown has proposed. So we have a long ways to go. Still, I would like to highlight that during the last 4 years, we have seen a great increase in the emissions of the greenhouse effect gases, and increase in deforestations and fires and practices that are not sustainable in the country. So that's a reason to worry. And when we should be in an accelerated track to reduce those practices, we have been giving some steps back. And that's why the political moment in Brazil nowadays is so relevant. The scaling of these extreme climate events is quite evident. We have seen many data and publication after publication from the Intergovernmental Climate Sciences Panel. Many scientists from Brazil, from Embrapa and many university centers have been producing data. Brazil has been suffering a lot with the break in the crops due to the climate effects. But I will especially speak about two topics that Professor Brown has mentioned. He spoke about many topics regarding food security and food production, and the coalition deals with some of those points that Brown has tackled, not all of them. We have usually been working with sustainability and low carbon emission, and also public policies and the necessity to adopt new policies or to update or adapt the ones that exist, especially the legal enforcement systems and the legislations being followed. So that's what I'm going to speak about today. We base our knowledge in the state of the art. We base our propositions rather in the state of the art, what we have here in Brazil, and also from what we learn from all over the world. So Caio has mentioned the tropical agriculture. We have used a lot of knowledge from the tropical agriculture, from the big hubs, but also from the practices from the First Peoples and agroecology and many others. And we can see that Brazil, in order to get into a competitive track, we have to accelerate quite a lot in order to integrate environmental conservation and agribusiness productions and trade production. So in order to do that, we have been promoting many recommendations. The coalition works with 14 fora that are integrated by, comprised by members from more than 38 institutions. So we gather a lot of practices and recommendations in order to act. We believe that Brazil is one of the countries that can offer the most efficient solutions based in nature for climate challenges and biodiversity conservation. We have been disclosing that, and we consider that Brazil is an environmental potency and an agribusiness potency. We have all of the elements to work, to make it work, but we have to deal with the problems that we have been threatened with during the last few years. So in order to keep those productive systems as conservators of biodiversity and not decharacterizers of ecosystems, and not putting us in the track of the international trade sanctions as announced by the European Parliament. We have to change a lot of practices. So our businessmen have been paying a lot of quite much of attention to that. And in 2020, many CEOs have written an open letter to show their preoccupation of the impact in business with the negative image that Brazil has had in with the other countries, and this has been affecting us and putting us in a track that hinders our proeminence as big food producers. So the Brazilian government has been receiving letters and communications from many entities, and the biggest private banks in the world and in Brazil, the former ministries of uh, agriculture and so on, and treasury, and many other people. So all of that made the coalition defend a few things. So in order to increase productivity and eliminate the effects or mitigate the effects of the climate change in production, promote traditional communities and original peoples, valuing their knowledge and acknowledging their knowledge, their existence. We have been defending 6 actions that are for to deal in that are thought out to deal with deforestation. If we don't do that, we won't recover our good image and the capacity of production won't be strengthened. So we created this document. You can find that in the coalition website. Basically, we want to intervene. We think that Brazilian society, the productive sector, the government and the investment sectors have to pay attention, and they have to invest in the causes and manage and reduce and deal with the causes of deforestation in the following way. So first, to retake and intensify the inspections with the quick and exemplary punishment for illegal activities that are identified. Second, to suspend registries from the rural registration system that would be against public restrictions and also criminalizing the responsibles for illegal deforestation. Third, to destine 10 million hectares to protect and sustainable use, protection and sustainable use. And Brazil is one of those countries that still have land that is not used, is not destined to anything. So 10 million hectares are absolutely paramount to do that. Four, establish and protect criteria for social and environmental policies. This is something Brazil is lacking behind quite a lot. Fifth, give total transparency and efficiency to the suppression of vegetation and the authorizations that deal with that. And then sixth, to suspend any license that deals allows real estate to deforest the region until that whatever was permitted until 2008. So the House, the Senate, the Congress, the National Congress, we are giving them the following message. First, we have to fight deforestation and fight the loss of natural resources. And in order to do so, we have to do what I just mentioned, those 6 actions in order to decrease deforestation. Second, we have to invest in the production of food and dealing with hunger. We have had this problem with the pandemic during the last 4 years that has been aggravating this problem, and we have to deal with family agriculture now. And so we need to transform our low carbon agriculture plan in the investment plan for Brazil. That should be the plan, not the Safra plan as it was implemented sideways during the last few years. And we also have to strengthen the integrated management of risks in agribusiness. And with that, we have to highlight the necessity of recovering degraded areas. We have millions and millions of hectares of degraded areas. This is the age of restoration. We have to do that in order to have water and healthy lands and reduce emissions and assure sustainable production. And lastly, what we have been saying to our candidates is to generate employment and income in order to face bioeconomy. I would have much more to say, but I want to give you the chance to speak as well. Thank you, Ingo. Thank you for Mr. Brown for this opportunity. Raquel, thank you so much for this opportunity. You are always clear and strong. You have highlighted you have strongly highlighted the environmental issue. This has also been a topic, the deforestation. It is good to remind everybody that, especially in the tropical forests, there is the huge majority of illegal deforestation, and while we still have that, it is hard to join the debate and new discussions internationally. And you also highlighted the hunger issue and the necessity of implementing family agriculture. Thank you so much for your excellent words. I will now pass on the floor to Professor Marcos Jank. Marcos,
It's very good to be with you again. December last year, we met. I had the honor to be with you, and now again we meet. You are a senior lecturer of agribusiness at INSPIR and also coordinator of INSPIR Agro Global. INSPIR Agro Global is one of the biggest and best think tanks in Brazil about the agribusiness. He is a highlight participant that goes beyond the borders of this continent and also navigates in the academy with grace. It's a member of the board of the SEBRI, where he leads the agro nucleus. He was the president of Unicam, where I got to know you the first time, and also in the Institute for the International Economy. He lived 10 years in the United States, in Europe, and in Asia, where he worked for the BRF. That is a huge company. And he also represented export companies like ABIEC and Unica. During 20 years, he was associate professor at USP and lectured at Esauki. And he is a huge emphasis on Esauki. In 2019, he was a second professor of Luis de Queiroz. He is agronomist at ESECT, has a master in agriculture policy in Montpellier, France, and has a PhD at the business administration faculty at USP. Marco Jank, your team is great through its publications and papers defending agri-policy in Brazil that is resilient, sustainable, and I thank you from my whole heart for taking part in this debate. You have the floor now. Thank you very much, Ingo. It's a huge pleasure to continue here with our partnership with the APD, and I'm very happy that one of our researchers could visit Germany to get to know the agenda in Germany and this event of the soya, and now this great event with our great professor Joachim von Braun. He is a very important member of IFPRI. I was a board member of IFPRI after he left, and I could live his legacy in the International Food Policy Institute in Washington, and I was really happy about this presentation. It was the best summary that I have seen in the last times about the characteristic of what we are living, factors that we were not expecting in 99. So what have happened in the last 2.5 years are unexpected factors. Nobody expected a war in the center of Europe. Nobody expected a pandemic, and nobody expected a geopolitical problem that is being shown very clearly in Europe, but also in China. And nobody expected that the climate problems, I think maybe everyone expected that the climate changes would reach us, but nobody expected it would be so quick and that we really needed this feeling of urgency. So I'm very happy to be here together with Caio, Rachel, and Mr. von Braun, talking about what will happen with the global food systems after this rocking that we are seeing now. So the first thing that we have conjunctural and structural issues. The conjunctural problems are the pandemics, and we hope this can be solved too. And as We saw by the presentation from the Professor von Braun that the pandemic had an impact, but this impact is not that much seen. The war is going far too far, and we hope that the world keeps itself rational and that we avoid a nuclear war that would be the biggest of all disasters possible. And obviously, inflation and recession that we see worldwide. We have also structural problems, and the climate topic is one of these facts. It's a factor that needs coordination in a huge way, and the geopolitical topics are also something important. And we need to understand that we have different components, different elements that need to be evaluated. Professor von Braun begins with the first slide. It's very interesting that he correlates the events and the given impacts. And that's my approach too. I understand that one of the consequences of these problems is that the food safety is a top issue again. It seemed that the world had solved this problem, the productivity gains that we had, but what we see now is that the food problem is very important right now, mainly in Africa, in the sub-Saharan Africa and north of Africa, in many Asian countries. That's where the problem is the worst. And in this context, my first reflection that I want to share with you is that the countries need to look for the right policies and not the wrong policies. And what unfortunately have been seen after this last meeting of the International Trade Committee, there are many wrong policies being defended. Many countries went in the direction to restrict imports and exports, and other countries want to have unlimited public stocks to create subsidies for their countries. And I never heard free trade on the OMC. So we had a huge effort for the Brazil to become a great participant in this forum, and it's important in the agenda of Doha, and this just vanished from the agenda. The OMC does not talk about free commerce anymore. They talk about managed commerce. The agenda of the Doha development has vanished, and Professor von Braun showed us a slide, climate change and crop yields. And one thing that could have helped us was the agenda of Doha. And this vanished, this is gone. So this is the first topic we should have and keep in the situation the world is. The markets must be open and not closed, not only for products, but also for raw materials, for resources. So Brazil is the most vulnerable country in the world regarding fertilizers. Brazil is the biggest fertilizers. He buys 85% of the fertilizers, and a huge part of it comes from Russia and Belarus. So we need to support the most vulnerable consumers. That is a very, very important topic. And we not offer subsidies to the producers without distortion. These would be the right policies, but unfortunately, the countries talk about wrong policies. In this context, I think we have to show the role of Brazil in this process, and it's a very important role in commerce. Brazil is the third biggest agriculture exporter in the world, only behind the European Union and United States. So I look at the European Union as a block. So the European Union is the biggest exporter with high aggregated value products. Then comes United States, Brazil, China, Canada, and so on and so forth. So Brazil has a crucial role because it's not only big, but after the pandemic, we just grew in 2000. It was $100 billion of export. Then we went to 120 billion, and now this year we will export 140 billions. Our capacity of reaction to these problems, the capacity of reaction is very high in Brazil, and it's very different than what we saw in Africa or Asia. They don't have this reaction capacity that we have in Brazil. And then we have a great solution in the agribusiness in Brazil that's not known abroad. Everyone follows the deforestation that happens in Brazil, and they really act upon it and pressure Brazil. And it's actually good. This pressure is good and real, but it's a local problem. The other side of the agribusiness in Brazil, that is the solution and not the villain, actually. We have the villain agribusiness, the victim agribusiness, and the solution agribusiness in Brazil. So obviously the villain is the deforestation, and the victim agribusiness is the impact of the climate change in Brazil that will victimize our productivity. And we have also the agribusiness as solution, and the agribusiness as solution. And we have many things that happened that made Brazil become what it is today. And they would be usable. The conservation of soils, the crop rotation, the nitrogen fixation, the productivity increase. So our productivity increases by 3% a year, and that's not a small number. And this is we do direct sewing, and we have a phenomenon in Brazil that is integration of ranching and agriculture. So when we see that Brazil will be affected by the climate change, so if you don't do anything, this will really happen. But we are acting, we are doing something, and we are really increasing our productivity. And if you have 2 crops in the same area, even 3 crops in the same area with irrigation and the integration of agriculture with pasture, we need to remember that the pasture areas, we are talking about 160 million hectares, and the agriculture land is the half of it at 80 million hectares. So pasture is the double of the agriculture area, and maybe this pasture can become agriculture land. I think this intensification of the use of the soil, where the Brazilian is the leader regarding tropical climate, it's an example that things are not that black. It is seem to be in the food systems. There's a lot of room for increase our production to grow. I think this decade for Brazil is the decade of the integration of ranching and agriculture, and it must be also the decade of the sustainable integration in the tropics. That's what I would wish. The temperate climate countries advanced a lot since the agricultural revolution, and then the American Revolution in agriculture, and the tropics just advanced in the last decades, and they advanced in a very different way. Even inside Brazil, it was very different. When we see soya and country, we saw cultures that really advance as a block, but ranching in Brazil is very different depending on the region. And this is something we has to intensify and accept the new technologies. So I believe that Brazil has an important role um, regarding climate safety, and I'm talking about the um, diminishing of deforestation, but also talking about ranching and sustainable agriculture. I'm also talking here about food safety because the tropics are fundamental and they are the most affected regions in this last crisis. Where when we look where it's really get worse, it get worse in the tropical regions or the regions there's no water. So at the end, that's where we have to increase the productivity and improve and make the commerce grow. China 40 years ago did not buy anything from Brazil, actually did not buy anything from the agriculture of ranching sector. They were totally closed, but nowadays they're the biggest importer worldwide and is the biggest buyer of Brazilian produce. And Brazil is the biggest supplier for China, even greater than the United States. So this topic of the commerce is fundamental, but many countries are closed to commerce. And the opening of the commerce and this topic vanished off the agenda. So Brazil has a very important role in this history. And I would finish with a topic that the professor brought to us, that is the role of the multilateral organizations. I'm a little bit more pessimist. I lived a long time abroad, outside Brazil, and I believe that these institutions lost the capacity to coordinate things, beginning with the UN, that, and we see this because of the war inside of Europe, and is uh, not working since the crisis of Doha, and is also valid for the World Organization for Health, that could not organize itself the pandemic. And we also see the COP meetings, but the governments are reacting very slowly to it. We discovered after this crisis that the transition
to low carbon would be very slow and complicated. So we have the problem of coal and gas, the issue of investments. Of course, we have ways out. Of course, Brazil is also a giant in renewable energy and not only in agriculture and forestry. We are great in that, but also renewable energies. Almost half of our matrix is wind, solar, and hydro, and biomass. Biomass is also used in Brazil as energy sources quite competently. But this transition to renewable energies, as we did in Brazil, is very slow. So this crisis and the need to reform and the need to have those reforms serving the current world, this world that is more polarized and in conflict, it seems to me to be a very important topic to talk about, because unfortunately, the impression I get is that it is everyone by himself, and we lack coordination. And this is still bad under, security-wise and climate-wise, because this is not a local problem, it's a global problem. And it is bad too for the worldwide trade, because in Brazil we are very relevant. So I think that's it. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Marcos Young, it is very good, as always, to hear you. I heard the three Brazilians speaking, and it's you, one way or another, you always mention the need to tropicalize the perspectives of agri production. So to tropicalize the metrics, the narratives, and tropicalize the perceptions of the potential and the possibilities of the agri-tropical entities. Also, another issue that Marcos brought is the issue of managing internationally, and I believe professor is going to say something about that. But I really liked your distinction between the agri-villain, the agri-victim, and the agri-solution. And we, of course, in APD, we also identified with agri-solution, not only in Brazil, but also in Germany. Let's do the following. As time allows us, Professor Joachim von Braun is going to speak for 5 minutes about the answers, his perceptions, and then we can still have 1 minute to each one of the Brazilians in order to say their final statements, and then we can proceed to finish this event. So, Mr. von Braun, you have the floor, if possible, in 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, colleagues. This was for me a great experience to listen to you. It's I don't look for 100% agreement, Caio Carvalho. You were too kind with your statement. Thank you very much. Rachel Biedermann, your focus on environment, the forestry, the soil issues was certainly duly noted on my side. And Markus Young, you brought up, besides the trade issues, also broader issues. Let me take a moment and make 3 concluding remarks from my side. Before I do that, I look forward to hopefully find an opportunity to continue this dialogue, and I'm happy to engage, Ingo, in the future. My first remark is I was pleasantly surprised that all 3 of you mentioned the critical issue of soils, a topic dear to my heart. We did a piece of research on the economics of soil and land degradation. The world annually loses at least $300 billion due to soil degradation, and that's mostly in the tropics, but not only. I wonder if carbon farming is a bridge. So enriching carbon in the soils, monitoring it carefully with new technology, thereby making carbon enrichment an opportunity for as an additional income earning capacity for farmers. We have a big debate on that in Europe, carbon farming. Carbon sequestration in soils. It's at an early stage where science and policy can come together. My second comment relates to technology, bioeconomy, and sustainable systems. I think we all need to be deeply worried about what's happening with mineral fertilizer, the excessive costs, and depleting soils of phosphate and potash. Nitrogen can be rebuilt, but I think that is another big issue where in Africa, for instance, fertilizer use has collapsed in many countries. Lastly, you mentioned a couple of overarching political issues. Mr. Carvalho, you mentioned the issues of autocratic regimes expanding. Markus Young, you hinted at the threat of nuclear war, which is considered no longer totally out of the question, and of course makes people nervous. In such an environment, also the food system cannot flourish, because it's the whole risk patterns which corporations, but also individual investors are confronted with, are increasing. In this situation, it is a pity, I agree, Marcos, that global organizations are weak. The United Nations have turned out weak, but they are weak because of the powerful governments use them as a tool, as an instrument for their power plays. So that's why I think we need to bring together powerful nations in G20 and the United Nations to again have international institutions which cater to us, the global public goods which food and agriculture systems need for open trade, for rule-based open trade, for sharing of science knowledge and so on. So these are my three remarks related to sustainability and soils, to technology and fertilizer threats and the political systems issues. Thank you again. Back to you, Ingo.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now this good. Muito
I'm
obrigado.
sorry. Thank you. We are going to invert the sequence in order to be very German and to finish in time. We are going to give you all 1 minute, and then Luis is going to, Caio is going to give his final remarks with me. Marcos Yankee, have 1 minute.
Quem começa, Ingo?
Who starts? You start.
Ok.
All right.
Eu queria
I would like
fazer apenas... Espera aí que eu estou com o...
just,
Eu estava aqui embaralhando aqui a tradução.
I was hearing translation.
O que eu acho
So
é o
what I
seguinte,
think
presidente, eu acho que
is,
mais que um debate, é um
well,
fator
finally, I think the debate is very interesting. And as Professor said, we have to keep going with this dialogue. I think this debate should be had in today's world every 3 months, you know, because things are so dynamic now. And we have so many new events coming up that it is worth retaking that debate every time. So, and also the volatility and uncertainty generated which have been documented here. You know, this ray of the relative prices during the last 2.5 years is driving everybody crazy because those phenomena are accumulated and they generate impact. I would just like to finish with a positive note, just saying quickly that Brazil has a role to play in the environmental issue, the energetic and climate issue, and the coordination of those actions is extremely important. And I have the impression that the international pressure is going to bring us to this reduction in deforestation sooner or later. But what I see that's very good that's happening today is that the private sector is much more engaged. So the public sector is not doing everything it should, especially in terms of fighting illegalities and also implementing the forest code that goes very slowly. But the private sector, in my opinion, is taking action. The companies are working with surveillance, monitoring, with certification and data tracking. With those demands are very close to the companies. I'm much more linked now to the business world than the governmental world. So I've been following many initiatives, and I think the private sector has reacted, is reacting, and things can advance. But in terms of trade, as I said, we have never exported so much, but the uncertainties regarding the public policies for trade are huge. And this makes it necessary to have a new international coordination to deal with that. It's not possible to deal with commerce only in the bilateral sphere, but we also need to deal with that and tackle that problem in the level of the big integrations. You know, Europe itself suffering with the internal disintegrations that are going on, the polarizations that are happening within Europe, and the whole Asian integration matter. It's also an issue. I think we have been advancing quite slowly in this area in a moment of distress for the world, when we need that coordination. The private sector has been advancing a lot, but the public sector not so much. And I think that is my final message. Thank you, Marcos. Raquel. Thank you, Ingo. I agree with Marcos that the multilateralism topic is paramount. I think we have lost a lot with these stepping back in the institutions. For instance, the COP has he mentioned. I think I have seen Steiner say something back in the day when he was dealing with the Environmental Agency of the United Nations. He would say that our organizations and conventions are now relegated to the role of being only a light that is blinking, shining and showing the alert, but it's not what is managing and dealing and leading the process of solution. So I've heard that from a UN director, program director, and that made me worry a lot. I still believe a lot in the multilateral solutions, but uh, we feel quite vulnerable, totally vulnerable to the all kinds of interests, political interests and so on. Political and even much vulnerable to crime, international crime. So I would just like to finish by saying, by stating that now in the Amazon, we are completely vulnerable to uh, drug trafficking. So we have many studies showing how much many regions are taken by criminal factions, and that has been affecting the whole dynamic in the Amazon region. We have 14 million people living in the Pan-Amazonian region, 9 countries that share those basins and the forest and um, those ecosystems. That has been a fundamental topic because we have seen repercussions of that in many other parts of the country. So addressing those causes of crime is paramount. And I would like to finish talking about the root of the problem, both for food problems and deforestation and uh, crime. It has to do with poverty. If we don't tackle poverty and if we don't create solutions that will offer alternatives for vulnerable populations, we will always have the need to recur to crime. And many families, and we go to the Amazon quite a lot, and we know that many families start getting involved with crime because they lack options. So nobody would like to commit crimes. I don't think that's a normal human objective. So this is my intervention. I think we need to look deeply to crisis. And lastly, just to finish, I'm sorry, the farming topic in the Amazon is still very relevant. So we have to deal with that and look at that, because food security and the supply of protein is still badly managed there, and we have to have good answers. And I agree with Marcus that the companies are getting involved with the solutions, but we still have a part of the sectors of the business sector that is not yet acting according to the challenge. Thank you. Thank you, Raquel. Caio, you please, your final remarks. Thank you, Ingo. I would like to highlight that I would like to look at the cup half full, as we say right now, and I would like to mention those two important elements for this dialogue, which is, first of all, trust. This is a magical word that has a lot to do, a direct relationship with investment. So if we don't have trust, we have difficulties in investing. So that brings us to a paramount, a fundamental issue, that is, whenever we feel that we have the coming back of restrictions internationally, we are saying that for sure we are going to be affected by hunger in the other side. So trust is a key word. It has to do with constant dialogue such as this now. This could be my final remarks, but this is the key in my view. I would like to say that deforesting, illegal deforesting in the Amazon, this is something that worries me too much in terms of the external sanctions. I can't imagine something that is not cooperation. Sanction for Russia for invading the Ukraine is seems to be very pertinent, but in terms of in the case of the Amazon, we have to speak about cooperation instead. Of course, we have the whole issue of police, and not only politics, but cooperation is a key word. So I would like to highlight the role of Brazil and the land sparing effect that we have, that Marcus mentioned. We have cattle raising, and Professor von Braun had, 5 years ago, we would have an average of 3 to 4 a year to fatten the cattle, and now we do that in 8 months. And of course, that means land sparing from the point of view of agribusiness and cattle raising, and then we can use that land for crop production, and we can do that, 2 3 crops in the same area in the same year. So that means sparing the land. That is fundamental in terms of sustainability. And As a last remark, I would like to highlight what Marcos mentioned, multilateralism and the international organizations, which is something that worries me the most nowadays when we speak about the World Trade Organization and when we speak about the COP itself from the point of view of sustainability. What do those two entities have in common? Well, what do they do for development? We won't have a transition as we want it. You know, it's going to be very slow if these entities don't play their role with the support of government. I would like to highlight the gap that the United States also brought to the WTO, and that was almost like uh, the last earth put on that grave, you know, so to speak, in terms of multilateral cooperation. That would be my synthesis.
Muito bom, muito obrigado.
Very good. Thank you so much. Agro is global. The problems, the challenges, the the food systems are global, and the political dialogues are just binational, aren't just binational. We have to work globally. We have tackled the farming and carbon market, and I would like to highlight that on the 27th of October, we will have another webinar together with Getúlio Vargas Foundation, which will be about that very topic. So I would like to thank again Joachim von Braun, Marcus Young, Caio Carvalho, and Raquel Biederman for the light and for your generosity towards us and for your guidance and perspectives that you brought us today. I would like to thank all of the participants the attendees that are here so far. I would like to thank our interpreters, Gustavo and Marcos. I would like to thank our dear Glacier, which is the one responsible for the whole technology and the organization for us. I would like to say that all of those events, all of the events, including this one, will be available in our channel, in our website, apdbrazil.de, and this material can be sent to everybody. We will send all of you a small assessment, you know, for all of you who took part in this, and I can assure you that responding that is just one minute, okay? And thank you so much. With a few minutes of delay, thank you so much. I really appreciate that, and we will have a next time for sure. See you next time.
Tchau, obrigada.
Thank you. Bye bye now.
Bye bye. Ciao, ciao.
Obrigado.